Welcome to the Nobody Listens podcast. I'm Ruven.
And I'm Maddie.
This week we will talk about a movie again, which is Big Fish by Tim Burton. It was made in 2003 and is based on a novel that we both haven't read, so we won't talk about the novel, we will just talk about the movie, which is the opposite of what we did for the last 2 weeks, where we said let's not talk about the adaptation because it's not really noteworthy. This time we will just talk about the adaptation because I literally learned that there was a book yesterday.
When I was watching the film today, I saw that it was based on a novel. I didn't actually know that.
You actually read the credits?
At the beginning, I watched it on Netflix.
I mean, I don't usually pay attention to the credits of Tim Burton movies because they are always the same people in those movies. You don't really need to pay attention to this. It's always...
I just noticed that it was on a separate page to the rest of the credits.
Ah.
As in, the screen, the only writing on the screen was based on a novel by... Who was it by?
Some bloke called Daniel Wallace, who doesn't even have his own Wikipedia article in Germany, apparently.
Oh.
So it's not a well-known author or well-known book, but it's a movie by Tim Burton. One of the lesser-known ones, which I find to be a little sad because, honestly, this is my favorite Tim Burton movie.
I guess you could say it's sad, but not necessarily. Is it tragic?
It's a bit tragic, yeah.
It is a bit tragic, yeah.
Basically, the whole movie, if you haven't seen it, it's about a son who really doesn't know his father very well because his father just spent his whole life telling stories about who he is, and so some people, the son for example, don't really think they know who he really is because all they know are these tall tales. And so we spend a lot of this movie with Ewan McGregor playing a younger version of the father in these fairy tale like situations.
And basically the whole theme is that the son has heard these stories that just seem too unreal to be believed, but he's not sure how much of it has some truth in it and how much to just dismiss. And this is kind of what's frustrating him.
By the way, what I found when I watched this yesterday is that I get a bit frustrated with the scenes in real life when we aren't in the story. They seem a bit drab and they tend to be a bit too long, I think. There's a lot of shit in there that really doesn't pull the story forward.
Because in reality, in the real life sequences, they're not, honestly, the most interesting of families.
They just seem kind of boring, like...
They're just kind of white American nuclear families.
I mean, is there even anything interesting about the wife of Edward Bloom, who is the father? Do you even remember her name?
Her name was Sandra, something with yellow, but I honestly thought the family life thing was a bit backwards. Then again, it was set a while ago.
Well, was it? I think it was set when it was made.
It was set when it was made, but most of it were flashbacks.
Yeah, I meant for the quote-unquote reality scenes now. Those would be taken...
And, I mean, nothing was... I found that the son, Will's wife, wasn't very developed at all as a character. All you saw of her is she's French and she's pregnant. Those are the only two things I can say about her.
Want to do the name test with her?
Hmm?
Want to do the name test with her? Trying to figure out what she was called?
The wife?
Yes.
Do you know what she was called?
Yes, but only because I have the Wikipedia article open. This is a good test to find out if a character was well written and actually brought up. Because
something with a J. Josephine?
Yes, Josephine. Because
I thought so.
Sometimes characters don't really are given a name much and are just kind of there as, you know, in this case, the wife of the son of Edward Bloom.
But
who also himself is a bit of a non-entity, honestly. You can do the name test with him as well. He's the son of Edward Bloom.
I remember the names, and I'm usually shit with names, but funnily enough, I thought if they were going to make the real life scenes so long and drawn out, they could have done way more with her personality and even his, and developed them as characters.
I mean, the only person who really gets to be a person in the real life scenes is Edward Bloom himself. And not only because he plays off his younger counterpart, but also he's just given a character and the other people really aren't.
I honestly didn't know what to make of Edward Bloom. On one hand, he wasn't always a ridiculously aggressive and controlling guy, like a lot of your typical all-American manly man or whatever that he was supposed to be. But I didn't like the fact that he was that kind of character in the first place. You know, small-town guy who thinks he's hot shit.
I mean, wasn't it a subversion of that? Because, you know...
I think that was the whole point. That's why it's called Big Fish. Because he's a big fish in a small pond.
But isn't that just what he thinks of himself?
Yeah.
Because we never get the perspective of anyone else.
No, because he was living in a tiny town with very few inhabitants, he was pretty much seen as hot shit.
Well, that is what he believes, at least. We never hear another perspective of
after
it.
attention the whole time.
I think it is. Because we never hear from anyone else. I mean, the only person that could tell us about these stories, at least some of them, is his wife, and she mostly doesn't support them very much.
Well, from what little you see of her views on them.
Well, you hear her views from her son.
Which is, again, you know...
Yeah. So, the stories, which are, you know, the more interesting parts of this movie, when I started this movie, I just thought, oh... Yes, I have to get through the real life scenes to...
Shall we start from the beginning, when he's in his hometown?
We really should. We should start with the very beginning. I don't know whether you notice this. The Universal logo in the beginning plays in reverse.
I didn't notice.
That is... It looks weird, and I couldn't put my finger on it the last time I saw this. Because
I
it
thought
just
it
looked
looked weird. I thought there's something wrong with this, but I didn't...
Yeah, because the beams go into the torch and not the other way around.
Why?
Because the logo is played backwards, so the beams don't go out.
Yeah, but why?
I don't know. I think it was just a decision to make the opening a bit more interesting without doing much effort.
So, the first story he tells, it basically... isn't it the one where him and the other kids are going to see the witch?
Yes.
Okay, so the first story is about how Edward Bloom, as a child, went through these dark forests in his hometown with a few other kids to go and visit an old witch who supposedly lived there. They wanted to find out if that was true and meet her.
Because apparently, if you looked into the eye, which was hidden underneath an eye patch, you could see your own death. And so... as a dare, they wanted to look her in the eye. And apparently the witch was really living there and let them look into her eye.
Remember who the little girl was?
Yeah, the little girl was the daughter of some country singer or other.
Yeah, kind of well known. Just kinda.
Some girl called apparently Destiny Cyrus. I don't know, maybe someone has heard of her. But these kids look into the eye of the witch and... see how they are going to die, which in two cases we get to see. One guy falling off a ladder while changing a light bulb, and some guy breaking down on his toilet, apparently while masturbating to the Playboy.
Probably of a drug overdose-induced heart attack, or from the strain of taking a shit on heroin, or something like that. Isn't that how the stereotype of dying on the toilet works?
Yeah, it is.
Usually associated with becoming an 80s style rock star and dying on the loo one day.
I'm not sure if the timeline would work for that, by the way.
I'm not sure. Either way, there was a Playboy magazine involved and he died on the bog.
When the kids are going to the witch's house, this kind of reminded me of the movie Stand By Me, which is based on a Stephen King novella and has 4 kids in the 50s going to find the body of another kid who died somewhere in the forest. And this back and forth with the girl saying, "Don't say words like that, I'm a lady," and everybody just rattling off curse words.
Shit.
That kind of reminded me of Stand By Me.
Oh, they do find out how he died on the toilet, actually. He had a congenital height defect that got worse when he was older.
Yeah, yes, that is mentioned later.
It's mentioned when he dies.
So we don't get to see the death of Edward Bloom, but from that point on, he isn't afraid of anything anymore because he knows how he's going to die. So later on, when this tree attacks, this is the tree from Evil Dead, right?
Yeah.
And he gets out by telling the tree, this is not how I'm going to die, and the tree lets him
And
go.
the tree kind of lets him go.
In the scenes where Edward Bloom wants to leave his hometown, as you said before, it's kinda shown that he seems to be the big fish of the title, even though there's an actual big fish in the title. He seems to be the big fish in the town who has to leave the pond because he becomes amazing at everything.
What's the thing about him having to be in bed for 3 years because he was growing so fast?
I mean, this is kind of just to tell
What
you
it
everything
probably
about.
was. That probably is one of the things that didn't happen.
Yeah, that is just to.
It's likely he just kind of shot through puberty and was speaking hyperbolically about it.
And this is just to show I don't belong here, I'm too big for this town. And that is why he tells his son, I grew up really fast, I was really good at everything. Which, you know, is something you would say.
It's something you would say.
I mean, you as something one would say.
It's still something you would say.
It is something I would say, yes. I can relate really well to this character, and I can also relate really well to his son because, you know, Edward Bloom at a lot of times sounds like my grandfather.
Does he do that?
Yeah.
So the next one was about a giant wreaking havoc in his town. Was that a few stories later?
No, that is we already messed up the timeline a bit. We don't need to worry about when we tell what.
Okay, so one of the stories is about some creature who's wreaking havoc on the town, and people are gathered before the mayor talking about how whatever this thing is, ate their dog, ate their livestock, and all of that. And the mayor is refusing to let them fight back against him physically. So Edward Bloom comes out of the crowd, and the crowd just parks for him as though he's, I don't know, some great leader or something. And he comes up and he says that he is going to try and reason with this giant.
Which he then does.
He does.
By the way, did you notice anything about the cave the giant lives in?
Is it a reference?
It is, and it's one of the most clever references. You saw the vulture in front of the giant's cave, right?
I saw the vulture eating a ram's head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you notice how bad that effect was?
I did, actually.
Yeah, you know why that was the worst effect in this whole movie, even though, you know, the movie otherwise looked mostly decent?
Mm-hmm.
That is a reference to Monty Python and the Holy Grail, with the vulture also being pulled by a string, sitting in front of the cave where the rabbit
I couldn't put my finger on what it was.
So,
Now you mention it.
the giant is the exact opposite of the rabbit, because the rabbit is small and adorable but deadly, and this giant is amazingly big and, you know, looks like a good value Wookiee, but is actually really gentle and nice and well spoken. So it's the exact opposite of the Monty Python scene.
Why did they have to give him that haircut though? It just looked plain. Wait, no, that's his. Didn't they basically take the wig and fake beard off him?
Yeah, they did. That is what they did behind the scenes. That is just what the actor looked.
He was like. Was that the guy with the world's biggest feet?
It was the guy with the world's biggest feet. And I saw him in the Guinness World Record book. He doesn't look good. He honestly looks better in the makeup which they did to make him monstrous. He wasn't a well-looking guy.
Yeah, but to be fair, he had a condition which
Yeah, he did.
affected the way in which his bones would grow, including the facial bones. Probably a pituitary tumor or something, but I'm not entirely sure.
Anyway, either way, it's great that people like that get a chance at the big time, like this actor. I'm actually gonna look up what he's called.
Matthew something.
Yeah, Matthew McRory.
It's good that they did that.
By the way, what I found really nice is that Edward not only has courage and strength as his values, but also friendliness and durability.
He's not just your average kind of, like tough, brutish, all-American stereotype. He's still flawed in a similar way, but he kind of has more intellect than how that trope is shown on average.
After leaving the town, he wanders into a forest.
He leaves the town with the giant.
With the giant, yeah, but they leave on two different paths. The giant takes an easy path, and Edward takes a path which hasn't been taken for ages. And we find out why. It's not that people get lost on it, it's people stay in this little town, which is basically perfect but very, very boring. It's another example of this Lotus Eater situation, where people stay in stasis somewhere because it's nice and they don't move forward, but it keeps them bound there. In this case, without ever being brought up by taking their shoes. This shoe business that this little girl takes everyone's shoes and throws them over this line is never mentioned. It's only brought up in pictures.
It happens twice in the movie.
It does, but it's never mentioned
I'll
either
mention
way.
the second time.
When we actually get to it, yeah.
Yeah. Now,
Did the town remind you of anything?
my first thought when I saw the town and the inhabitants and everything and the families, it kind of had a Stepford vibe.
I thought about that as well, but the other thing I thought about is Tim Burton's own Edward Scissorhands. And Tim Burton...
There too.
Tim Burton tends to use this 50s sitcom America, basically, as this is how the world shouldn't be. Like, quite a lot.
Tough guys, housewives and white picket fences. 2.5 kids and a dog.
Exactly.
The 50s version of perfection, but there's nothing behind it.
The 50s TV version of perfection, at least.
Yeah, but there's never anything else to those towns. It might as well be a bunch of cardboard cutouts. I think that's the point, though.
It is. I mean, Tim Burton often goes for this cardboard cutout type style when he portrays this kind of town.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Like, literally doing it.
Isn't there a point where the 8-year-old girl starts hitting on him?
There is. Where she just starts counting when
Their age difference.
their age difference and how that won't matter as much when she gets older, because 8 and 18, that's a difference, but 30 and 38, it's not much of a difference.
28 and 38.
Did I get the difference wrong? I thought it was a difference of 10 years.
Did you just say 30 to 38 was 10 years?
I'm not as awake to...
We're leaving this in.
We might.
We will.
So there's an either 10 or 8 year difference between them, and I get confused what I said
There's a
and what
10
you
year
said.
difference.
A 10 year
And if he's
nomination.
38, she'd be 28.
So she's 8 and he's 18.
Yeah.
He's so clearly not 18, by the way. The makeup can't hide the fact that he isn't.
Speaking of the fact that he's clearly not 18 and looks about 30 there, he kind of just looks like a 30-year-old with lots of foundation on. Is
Which I would have
anyone going to
mind-
mention Ewan McGregor's Deep South accent? He
You
keeps
notice
slipping
that?
out. You know when he doesn't know how to do a word
Yeah,
and make it sound convincing? He just slips. Doesn't he have a Scottish accent?
he does. Originally
He
does.
just slips into an English accent instead of an American. Did you notice that?
Well, it's not as noticeable to me, because, it's not my first language, which I mentioned so much on this podcast, I know, but the thing is, I just noticed that it's not convincing. I don't notice that...
He comes in and out of it.
Yeah, that he sometimes slips up, not what he slips into. But, yeah, I've heard better, I've heard much worse.
He slips into a kind of Midlands accent at times. It's quite amusing.
I originally saw this film in the German dub, where, any sort of dialect gets lost, because when we in Germany dub a movie, what we do is kind of smash everything into a boring type of well-spoken German, which is kind
Really,
of
but
boring.
wouldn't it make more sense at times to there is obviously a risk of just being plain offensive, but sometimes let's say somebody has a very characteristic dialect.
Yeah.
Choose a German voice actor that comes from a place that's maybe similar or an equivalent to that.
Yes, I would absolutely go for that. And
So let's say they're doing one of those dates. They could do what would be the nearest thing you can compare?
to Deep South?
Yeah.
Bavaria. We have our own Deep South.
That's what I'm thinking. They should do that.
We have weird racist guys who don't want to be in the Union, who are in the South. That is the same thing as Southern people. They even have their own stupid flag which they fly everywhere. But at least the Bavarian flag is an actual locality flag and not a flag for a war to keep slaves.
They should do something like that.
Yeah, they absolutely should.
And maybe, let's say, a character in a film is a stereotypical farmer or something.
They would talk like people who live around where I currently live.
They could get someone from your area.
They do that for comedies at times, but mostly they don't. Which is a shame, because, you know,
You
there's
guys are the
more
butt of all the jokes.
there is more to the German language than just plain, normal, correct German. Like, we see the beauty of the English language a lot in movies with different dialects and shit. I have no idea where we were before I went on this tangent. We were talking about the Lotus Eater town.
We were, and I was mentioning how it seems kind of fake. And then they go into one house, and it's just the family sitting around the table, whilst the wife dishes up pie, of course.
The best pie he has ever eaten, of course.
Which he only has one spoon of. What a fucking waste.
While he sits next to Steve Buscemi, who is celebrated in this town as the world's greatest poet, even though he can't even finish a rhyme because, you know, the town is so nice, he doesn't need to.
Doesn't he creep you out a bit in this film?
He always creeps me out.
He creeps me out in every film.
I can't think of anything he was in where he didn't creep me out.
I think there's just something creepy about him. Or is it the fact that he always plays creepy characters?
What else would he play?
Or does he play creepy characters because he's creepy?
Yeah, it's the same with, what's his face, the guy who voiced Dobby in the Harry Potter movies, who also was like a Doctor Who villain.
I see what you mean.
By the way, why wasn't Steve Buscemi picked up by Marvel Studios or something?
He could have made a damn good Marvel villain.
He probably will at some point. By the way, this town is called Spectre, and when I googled town of Spectre, what I found is that you can actually visit the town of Spectre, because in some island in the middle of nowhere, they actually built this town, and now it's a ghost town of creepy movie.
Ironically.
Yeah, or ironically. And it's
It's
on an
funny
island,
that,
actually.
because you think it could be a town somewhere rather than a creepy, uninhabited one on an island.
Really? Could you picture somebody living there?
I could picture it either being a really, really weird town somewhere in the deep south that's very backwards and very traditional family values, or a prop made out of cardboard cutouts.
I kind of was surprised to find out that they built actual houses for this. I kind of assumed it was a studio.
Yeah.
Because, you know, because it's old stories, it has a kind of artificial vibe to it.
It kind of looks like a CGI.
Actually, nothing in this movie looked much like CGI except for the spiders in the forest. The spiders in the forest were obviously CGI, but everything
The
else
town
looked kind of
could be a
handmade.
CGI.
It could be.
If you told me it was, I'd believe you.
But he escapes from this town basically by figuring out that the poet stopped being a poet because he had nothing to write about, because everything there was perfect. Which I think is a good point, that art or even stories can't be made in, you know, a
The
perfect
poem
world.
he writes at the end when he runs out of ideas is roses are red, violets are blue, I love Spectre.
Yes,
The
because
way
art can
he
be
says-
created in...
What I thought is that the way he just says, I love Spectre, and that's basically his whole poem. Well, it almost seemed like, when people blindly say they love something in that cult-like brainwashed fashion.
Yes, like certain
Which
towns, certain cities.
which kind of fits the vibe of that town.
It does.
It's, oh, everyone loves it and it's so perfect. But really, is it? It's that scene is quite creepy, actually.
Which is a good use of this actor. This kind of creepy but also friendly thing.
Do you think he would have made a good Purple Man?
No.
Really?
Yeah, first off, he's too old at this point, but also he doesn't have this. Steve Buscemi is nice, but David Tennant is sexy. And you need someone who is creepy and sexy, and not creepy and nice for this role.
True. What was that dead meme about his eyes?
It was basically cutting out his eyes in the photo and then putting them on someone else's face for
terrifying results.
Yeah, for terrifying results. People remember that.
I think
Apparently,
the creepy thing about him. One thing that creeps me out about him is no matter what his mood or facial expression, he just looks vaguely sad.
Yeah.
He kind of has resting sad face.
So, should we get into the whole circus and falling in love story?
Yes. I started watching the rest of it today, and it started the circus scene just when I was high as fuck and I saw a clown. You didn't warn me.
I forgot that you had a thing about clowns. And I also didn't know that you were high when you watched the movie.
It's not that I have a particularly strong phobia, it's that you're one of the few people I know who doesn't find clowns creepy at all. That little clown was a bit weird.
The one played by...
Well, anything in clown paint was a bit weird. You know the story behind clowns back in the day, right? It's actually kind of sad.
No, do tell.
About clowns in the Victorian era and stuff, and how they were treated. Well, how circus performers in general were treated.
You mean freak shows or just plain clowns?
Both. A lot of them had no choice but to be clowns, and, well, you know how a lot of circus owners treated all their performers.
Well, I know about
basically like
Merrick.
Livestock. Yeah.
I mean, the story of Merrick the Elephant Man is kinda famous and very sad.
I couldn't watch that film. I really couldn't watch that film. Anyway, no, the story of clowns is quite the one.
By the way, the name I was looking for is Deep Roy, who plays the clown Mr. Soggybottom. You might have seen him elsewhere. For example, in Tim Burton's Chocolate Factory, or... Oh, yeah, in the Neverending Story movie. Kinda slipped my mind right now, because, I was kinda trying to block it out last week. Anyway... In the circus, Edward Bloom falls in love, and the boss of the circus, played by... Why am I so fucking bad with names today?
The guy who looks like Ron Jeremy. What's his name?
Danny DeVito.
Sorry, he did look like Ron Jeremy in this movie.
I don't know who that is.
Like, the first name that comes into your head when someone says porn.
That is...
Is he like the most famous guy in porn? Don't look up his videos. You will regret it.
Danny DeVito, once again in a Tim Burton movie, working with clowns after Batman Returns, where he was the Penguin and had an army of clowns.
He did.
And clowns in very similar makeup. So Tim Burton now gets to reference himself.
I'm assuming the part where Edward Bloom joins the circus and fights lions is one of the made-up parts.
Well, he might have worked for a circus. But he
did. It showed later. There was a reference later to him having actually worked in a circus.
And of course, we actually get to see the colorway guy, the circus guy played by Danny DeVito in the end.
Yeah.
So we know that he's a real character. I think we should kind of get into the ending before we get into other stuff, because I kind of just spoiled the ending. In the end, it turns out that this... I mean, you did spoil half of the ending before I spoiled all of the ending.
Fuck off, what did I spoil?
You said something about the stories being half true and shit.
Oh shit. Should we get rid of that bit?
No, we just gonna say that in the end, when the main character dies...
Yeah, but isn't an analysis of a film going to spoil everything anyway?
I mean, yeah, but I kind of wanted to leave the ending for the ending, because we started off going...
Yeah, but I'm assuming the listeners have already seen the movie.
I kind of hope so.
Otherwise, this will just spoil the whole thing for you.
it'll do every week, no matter what we talk about.
That's what I mean. So I'm assuming people have either seen the movie or doesn't care about it getting spoiled.
I mean, you can watch a movie if you know all of its plot. There's no spoiler that will ruin the movie for you.
It doesn't really have a lot of twists.
I mean, if a spoiler will ruin your enjoyment of a movie, that movie isn't very good, because all that movie relies on is one twist. If the movie is still good after I explain the story to you, it is a good movie. And I mean, if I could ruin a movie with spoilers, well, I wouldn't have watched this movie now for the first time in my life. It's good, because I don't really watch it because it has interesting twists and turns, but because it's an interesting and very emotional movie. In the end, it turns out that the stories he told were true, as you said, but not in a literal way and not as spectacular. For example, he later runs into 2 Korean girls who are sisters and apparently share one pair of legs, and it turns out those were just, regular twins who had 2 pair of legs. And the same goes for everything, basically.
I remember they used to sing in the circus, and noticed with the costume, and it wasn't the circus, was it? It was the performance they did later for the army. I noticed how they tried to mix a very stereotypical East Asian music style and costume. Korean, did you say?
I assume they were Korean because it should have been the Korean War. Otherwise, I don't know when an American army was ever in South Asia.
Vietnam.
That is not in South Asia, but in
East Asia. I said.
Yeah. I said South Asia as a mistake, yeah. But those aren't Vietnamese women. And that is not the Vietnam War. That is the Korea War.
That's Korea. They're Korean. And I noticed the combination of those aesthetics and kind of westernized music.
Do you think that was Danny Elfman's doing? Or that it was a choice? I mean, it was Danny Elfman's doing so because he was the guy in charge of the music.
I'm not sure. I would say that it kind of seemed at first like they were fetishizing the women's culture, but then again, I noticed they weren't performing for an American audience.
I mean, they were also performing for an American audience because it's an American film. Made mostly for an American audience.
That's true. Within the film they weren't, so I'm not sure about the intention, but it kind of... You see where I'm coming from.
I do.
It could have been.
Apparently, this movie was originally meant as a project for Steven Spielberg, but he made
What?
Yeah. It kind of looks like it would be like a Burton project from the start on, but apparently the studio attached Burton to it after Spielberg rather wanted to make Catch Me If You Can, which we might talk about later. This is also a movie we should really discuss sometimes.
How do you imagine it would be different if it had been a Spielberg movie?
I mean, it would have been really different because...
It would have, but I mean, in what sense do you imagine it would have been different?
It might have been a bit more realistic and a bit friendlier. And all the Tim Burton alumni wouldn't be in there. We wouldn't get the Elfman music, we wouldn't get Helena Bonham Carter, we wouldn't get Deep Roy, we wouldn't get Danny DeVito.
And you'd have less of the dark overtone in the visuals and the stories and everything.
And we wouldn't get Ed Wood, the costume designer who always works with Burton and who is a big part of Burton's style.
You still should have warned me about that. Circuses freak me the fuck out.
I didn't recall. I will tell you the next time we see something I've watched previously which features a circus.
Do circuses not creep you out?
No. I like circuses. What's wrong with that?
Everything!
More than the clowns? I mean, I can kind of see where you're coming from
Just
with
everything.
classic clown. Why?
I don't know. Maybe it's because of the clowns. Maybe it's the association with clowns. Have you ever been to one?
Yes, obviously I've been to quite a few. I've been to good ones, I've been to the small ones. Well, I noticed, by the way, I didn't say good ones and bad ones. I said good ones and small ones because I kind of don't want to discourage the small circuses, even though, they aren't as good as the big ones. Those people hold on to their dear lives with their performance, and I know that they put their heart into it. They just can't compete with something like Roncalli or Knie, but still, that's hard work.
It is.
So, one thing which I kind of want your opinion on is Helena Bonham Carter's role or her roles, because in the stories by Edward Bloom, there only seems to be one person. The little girl, the old witch, and someone he meets later appear to be the same woman, even though the timeline doesn't make sense. Like, at first he appears to him as this old creepy witch who looks to be about 70, 80 years old, when he is about 10. And then
what doesn't make sense to me is when the son is talking to the old version of Jenny, but not old as when she was as the witch.
Yeah.
She's talking about how she couldn't have been the witch because of the age, but it's the same person.
But yeah.
And the witch thing did happen because the guy who was gonna die on the bog actually did.
Yeah, but that's we only get one perspective for that.
So we don't know if he actually did die like that.
He probably did die like that, but he probably didn't know.
So he probably made the witch thing up because he told the story after the guy died. Could have happened. It could have happened like that.
What is probably true is that he and his friends went to this creepy lady's house, who they assumed was a witch because she lived in the middle of nowhere and looked creepy and had an eye patch.
But it was still her. Wasn't she supposed to... Well, no one says what happens because when he meets her again and she's a young woman, she talks about how she married a guy at 28 when she was 18.
Yeah.
And it was quite a big age gap after all, as in it didn't work out. Then she tries to come on to him, but he has his wife. So he rejects her. But there's nothing to say that after that she didn't move into the woods on her own.
Yeah, but then that wouldn't make sense. That would put fantasy elements in the real life story. And we only get fantasy elements in the...
As in, I'm not necessarily saying she was a witch, but I'm saying had that eye, but there's a possibility that within that time she could have lost an eye, she could have moved into a place in the woods.
And then traveled 20 years into the past, or what?
Oh shit, because that scene is in the real world, isn't it? You're right, it doesn't make sense. She mentions it.
Maybe you should actually watch some of the movies while sober. Because... if this dream logic that Edward Bloom has makes sense to you, you are either too tired, too sick, or too high. I kinda expected you to go off on this, what Jenny, who is a witch, says in the end about, for Edward there are only two women, his wife and everyone else.
No, because I forgot about that.
What do you make of that?
I forgot that happened.
Yeah, that is why the witch is a thing. Why the witch and the little girl and this woman are the same. They are all played by Helena Bonham... I mean, the little girl isn't, but the little girl is made up to look like Helena Bonham Carter.
Not sure. Why does she speak for everyone else? Also, at what point does she say that again?
When his son confronts her to find out whether any of the stories are true. And he says, well, your timeline doesn't make any sense. And she basically goes, yeah... because, you know, I'm a woman and Edward kinda lumps us all together if we aren't his wife.
That kind of fits because his view of women seems quite narrow, honestly. And it pissed me off, the plot device where he basically sees her, stalks her, and when he finds the guy she's supposed to marry, toilet guy...
Toilet guy? Toilet guy, yeah.
Toilet guy. And he turns out to be...
That sounded like, that sounded like you wanted to diss the actor about something. But then I remembered that there was actually a plot guy. It's kind of like how the rap critic calls Kanye West Boobcake Man, because...
because that happened.
Because there is a music video for someone else's song in which Kanye appears with... two cakes that look like boobs. And so, I kind of assumed you did the same thing with this actor. And I just thought, I never saw this actor before. What did he do with the toilet?
Toilet guy, though. And he sees who he is, and he's being really possessive over her, and then he beats him up. But in that scene, what annoyed me was it was a stereotypical men fighting over a girl. Well, Bloom wasn't fighting back because he promised her not to, but still... and the woman screaming and going, stop it, stop fighting, whilst just kind of flapping around. Did they put that in for irony?
I'm not sure. And I'm not sure whether that matters why they put that in.
The problem is that they put it in.
Yes. No, that's not the problem, that's the point. And you can make of that what you will. I mean, if the director had a good intention but it didn't work, it's the opposite of whether he was thinking something wrong but it came out right. What matters to me is what is actually on the screen and not what some director decided.
Okay.
So what do you make about what is actually on the screen?
What I'm saying, did you just try and explain to me how movies work?
Not really to you,
You
but
bitch.
but not to you, to our audience.
I'm gonna do a compilation of you explaining shit.
That is like the third compilation you want to make of this podcast. But what do you think about what is on
I'm
the
not
screen
that dumb for saying.
without trying to figure out what somebody meant? What do you think is on screen?
A, I'm not that dumb, and B, as I said, I thought it was kind of backwards that they just added that in, but it fit the character. As in, this was set in 50 small town, so I guess it fits with the way people were socialized back then.
Well, it fits with what we think people socialized. Because you know what we know about this time.
When you say something, and then a man corrects you by saying the exact same thing but worse.
Fuck off.
I'm gonna do a mansplaining compilation. Yes, you did.
Twice. I'm not sure if I did.
You did. Actually, would you like me to explain to you why you did?
I said something completely different.
No, you didn't.
Getting back to what were we talking about? Oh, the wooing scene.
And then I kind of don't like the way after that, even though she doesn't know him, she finally falls for him and marries him on the same day because...
Basically because he's not the guy who beats someone else up.
She specifically says, the guy who beats him up says, I forgot his name. He says that, oh, do you love him? And then she says, well, I prefer, if it's you I'm going to marry, I prefer him, or something to that effect. And she only marries him. She only marries Blue because he is not that guy. And honestly, the way he tracked her down to find her, because he's big shit and he must know when he's met the woman he's going to marry and all that. I mean, come on. That is entitlement at its finest.
Yes, if you take his perspective away completely with, you know, this time-stopping moment, which is amazingly done, by the way, and his lovey-doveyness of working years in the circus for no pages to find out shit about her. If you take his perspective away from that and take the circus away, because, you know, they probably met at the circus and then he stalked her, and everything else is what he tells about it, that's kind of creepy. And
well, whether that thing happened or not, he still stalked her.
Even if it happened like it happened there.
Yes, he still tracked her down and persisted. I mean, incidentally, yes, she was unhappy about her engagement and he was a complete cunt, the guy she was meant to marry. But even so, how was he to know that? He didn't know that. He still did what he did.
He didn't even know that she was engaged.
He still tracked her down and insisted that he was going to marry her. Why is that being glorified?
I'm not sure whether we should give the movie the benefit of the doubt on this and say it's because they are portraying a 50s environment or whatever. Because, you know...
I actually like the director, but that doesn't mean there weren't problems in this movie.
Obviously. And I'm not sure what the mainstream audience thinks of this, who doesn't look at it as critically as you do, because honestly, the last time I saw this movie was at age 15 or something thereabouts, and I didn't notice that problem until now, when I watched it at age 22.
Do you feel old?
I do now that I figured out how long ago me being 15 was. Because honestly, I don't feel 7 years older than 15. I basically feel like I am 15, but have grown a beard and know a few things more. So I'm, again, really surprised that you didn't go all off about this Helena Bonham Carter in 3 roles thing. Well, 3 Helena Bonham Carter roles, 2 actually being played by her. Because it's...
What do you mean me going off about it? Isn't that a bit demeaning?
I meant going off as in the Going Off podcast, which I now recommend. It's more like you see something and just run into the direction and talk a whole lot about it, what we do with a lot of... I kind of found this to be the key to this whole movie, that you kind of have to take
You have to
everything.
go off on a lot. There's so many references and so many deep points that you can't really avoid it.
I mean, that is how we choose our topics, isn't it? Stuff
Pretty
we can
much.
go off about. I find it weird that I caught that and you didn't.
Her playing the same roles. I assumed that had to do with whether it was the same person or not. It kind of fucks you up. So, oh, I see why they got the same person to play the witch and to play Jenny, because they're going to be the same person. And then later the timeline isn't right, so you're kind of left thinking,
Yeah, but that is what I mean. They explain that by saying, oh, that is just how Edward thinks about women that aren't his wife. Just kind of by smushing them all together.
Yeah, I kind of gathered that. He seems the type. He's kind of okay, so he does a lot of good things, and he's not the most arrogant, look at me, I'm so manly type. But as I said, that doesn't mean he doesn't have that flaw to a degree, and he does seem to think he's hot shit, and that if
I mean, Big Fish
If you
is
look
kind of a synonym for hot shit, isn't it?
yeah, he seems to see her as another quest, another mission, another act of brave heroism, or however he sees it.
You mean his wife, right?
Winning
Not
the
Jenny.
girl, yeah.
Yeah, she's kind of just another point on his adventure checklist.
Yeah. Also, you see how few women he actually interacts with, right?
Yes, that is the point of the witch character.
That's the thing. So maybe she's suggesting that the only real relationships he's had with women, platonic or otherwise, is her and his wife.
Well, not her, because her includes 2 other women she has no idea about.
Yeah, but they're played by the same person, so maybe she's suggesting that either they're like her, or in his view, they're like her.
In his views, they are like her. By the way, did you catch the Fight Club reference?
Other than Helena Bonham Carter being in it.
Yeah, obviously, when the kids walk up to her house in the Stand By Me type scene.
Yeah.
Somebody mentioned that she, who was played by Helena Bonham Carter, turns people into soap.
I wasn't sure what he was saying at that point, whether he said soap or not.
He did.
But I did think about that. You haven't even seen Fight Club, have you?
I haven't, but you know there are two
I
things
have.
there are 2 things that everyone knows about Fight Club. 3 things. 3 things. There are 3 things everyone knows about Fight Club.
Did you plan on seeing it?
I plan on talking about it in this podcast.
I'll have to watch it again.
One thing before we come to an end with this thing. You know that this movie was very fairy tale like without having any explicit reference to any fairy tales?
I did notice that.
You know, there are like scenes with giants
No.
and there is a wolf in there.
As in, there are stock characters,
Yeah. And obviously there's a witch in there.
but it's kind of a different story made of the same stock characters that you can't necessarily compare to any one that's widely known.
And they kinda put the fairy tale stuff in with the actual time periods. Like they have a lot of 50s and 70s stuff in there. And then they just, when it suits them, put fairy tale shit between them. Which I think that's kind of how fairy tales work, right? To put things into perspective, to tell stories not about actual people or time periods, but about the human condition in terms that everyone
So they're
can
kind of
understand.
metaphors and thought experiments.
Basically. And so
Yeah.
this guy, basically for his son, turns his life story into metaphors and thought experiments, as you said, or into fairy tales, as it would more commonly be known. Because we get a lot of, realistic things.
And I
But
think
then we get the fairy tale stuff in between.
the point where he'd had enough is he loved these stories as kids, but when his father was making a speech in front of family friends and everything, he thought, right, well, this is getting fake. Do you remember the scene with the doctor when he asked for the true account of how he was born and everything? And the doctor explains how that's not the real story, but if he were to choose a more or less elaborate one, he'd go for more.
Would you?
Personally.
Yes.
No.
You wouldn't?
Would you?
I'm not sure. I think I would.
You seem the type.
I mean, there are certain stories that I tell a lot, and I think that if you...
That happens, though.
Yeah, I mean, I've told you some stories about my school days, right? And those are stories that I have told like a million times at this point.
Yeah.
Ask Denise what really happened.
Kind of.
You might have a very less heroic story at times.
Yeah, but you kind of have a big ego at times.
I mean, basically everyone's Korean twins only have 2 pairs of legs and not 1. I mean, that's true for everyone.
True. Okay, sometimes I speak hyperbolically and stuff, but I don't necessarily feel the need to exaggerate everything I say.
Well, at times it's not only...
It blows up in your face.
Sometimes it's simplification, like combining 2 or 3 stories into one.
That's one thing as well, but I think when it's getting to the extent that it was in this movie, over time there will probably be inconsistencies and it'll blow up in your face. How embarrassing would that be?
Well, you could just say, well, that was years ago, it might have been on 2 different weekends. Which is probably the case.
True. So what actually happened?
Well, the downsized thing of everything we saw. I mean, by the way, for the more realistic stuff, like him being the salesman for this weird hand thing, or him robbing the bank with nothing in it and then getting $20 so the other bank robber
didn't actually rob a bank.
Do you think he did, or do you think he did? Do you think he sold that weird hand thing, or do you think he did?
Imagine Edward Bloom robbing a fucking bank. He's too much of a good law-abiding citizen trademark.
By the way, what did you think of Ewan McGregor in the 70s hairstyle?
That hairstyle, okay, I'm not really, unpopular opinion, that big a fan of shorter haircuts on guys anyway, but... Let's say, okay, the hairstyle suited him, but if you take the haircut away from the guy and just look at the haircut, it's very white bread, isn't it?
I was thinking, him and Steve Buscemi looked weirdly good in those, even though it's not a very good hairstyle. And it kind of suited them, even though they aren't the prettiest guys around.
I also liked the amount of ginger representation in the film.
True.
Having said that, there were 3 characters that weren't white.
Yeah, the doctor and
Only
the 2 twins. Or is there someone else?
I think 3 speaking characters. I'm not sure about the circus owner. You said it was Danny DeVito, didn't you?
Danny DeVito. He's pretty white. But
he's white.
But Mr. Stockingbottom, Deep Roy, isn't. I'm actually not sure what he is. I think maybe he's an actual garden gnome. I'm not sure what he is.
Did you just pronounce the G?
Yeah, I did. Because that word is related to the German word gnome.
Also, yeah, it was very white. I suppose it's set in a very white town.
In a very white imagination. Apparently, Deep Roy is Kenyan.
Ah.
And to make that clear, I didn't mean he looks like a garden gnome because he's Kenyan. I meant he looks like a garden gnome because that is the type of role he usually plays in, because he's a very small, kind of funny looking person who makes his career by making funny faces.
You're talking to a very small, funny looking person.
True.
Maybe not funny looking.
Yes,
with
but
clown hair.
But only in comparison.
In comparison to?
Deep Roy.
You little bitch.
I just put what you said and what I said into perspective.
Mansplaining.
And next week, in this podcast, we will talk about the White Stripes album Elephant, which was released the same year this movie was.
We did talk about the ending.
Oh, yeah, we will talk about the ending before we say goodbye to you all.
We haven't even mentioned that in the real life scenes, Edward Bloom is old and dying of cancer.
We haven't. That's a framing device. I told you the framing. I told you I was thinking, oh, I have to get to the framing of this movie.
Okay, so that happens, and the whole point is that all these times he says he's not going to die. He knows how he's going to die, and he says it's not going to be from the cancer. Or at least not. Did he mean he's not going to die at home?
I think that's what he meant. I think he meant he's going to die while catching or while being the big fish, which he always dreamt of catching.
And that he's going to escape the hospital with his son, and whilst everyone's watching, the son will take him down to the river, where he gives the ring back to his wife, and then just releases him into the water. Funnily, what happens next is the way he actually dies. He dies whilst the son is telling the story. In a sense, he died in hospital, and that didn't happen as such. In another sense, it kind of did happen, because if he dies, he leaves the hospital. And he ended up in the same place for his funeral, didn't he, with all the people around?
Because he kind of dies while hearing his story, so he dies in his world.
He dies in his world.
Because he dies while hearing the story, and his stories are more his world than the real world is.
That's true. So kind of both.
Yeah. And of course, this is the first time that the son and the father can really connect, not with the son.
That's why the son tells him the story.
Yes, because the son moves closer to the father instead of asking the father to come to him. He comes to the other way around, because it's easier for the son to get into the story than for the father to get outside of the story. So the person who has learned something from all this is actually the son, who is a bit of a non-entity in this whole movie, and not Edward Bloom himself. Once again, character test. I have no idea what the son is called.
Well, I think I looked it up. I had to look it up to remember his name.
You shouldn't have to.
Do you recognize the actor?
I didn't.
Billy something. I don't know how to pronounce his surname.
What is he
His
known
last
for?
name kind of cracks me up. He's definitely in something. He was definitely in a few well-known
William
works.
Bloom, played by Billy Crudup.
Yeah, that name cracks me up.
He was in Public Enemies. I've seen that and don't remember much about it. He was in this stupid Watchmen adaptation.
Oh, that's what he was in Watchmen and Alien Covenant.
I didn't see Alien Guy. Oh, he played Dr. Manhattan.
Yeah, I thought it was him, but I've forgotten. Oh yeah, the shoe thing happens again during the sequence where we're seeing the story that he's telling his father. And is it Jenny that does it again, but as an adult?
I think it is.
If I remember rightly. So.
And once again, the shoes thing isn't addressed. It's only a visual thing they do, which adds a bit to this being Tim Burton's best movie by a wide margin.
In your view?
In my view, and
why are
I
the
will
IMDb
fight
ratings so low?
I don't know. I mean, there is a lot of Tim Burton backlash because a lot of his movies lose their punch after seeing them a few times. You tend to notice a lot of problems with them.
True.
Because he's very much style over substance. And his
I
style
guess
gets
it's
kind of
also
boring after a while.
it's very hard to follow the plot. The plot's a bit thin.
It's a bit dreamlike, but it suits the director really well.
It does. It's something that works with his style of directing.
I'm not sure.
As opposed to something that should be more substance and less style.
Obviously, Spielberg is a much better director than Tim Burton is, but I still think this project just suited Burton a lot better.
I can imagine it as a Spielberg movie, but I think it would go deeper than it needs to and wouldn't necessarily have the stylistic qualities that make it a good movie.
Yes.
Without being more style than substance, do you think this will actually be a good movie?
Honestly, what I thought when I learned it was based on a book, I thought if you take away the movie elements of it,
it could make a good book.
I thought the complete opposite. I thought this would be. I don't want to judge the book. Maybe it's really good, but I can't imagine it
It
being
would
as
make
good a
for a
book as it
bland
is.
plot.
Yeah.
Because unless the events that happened were purely real, I don't think it would make that interesting of a book. But I can't say for sure. Maybe I'll give it a read and then give my perspective on it.
But for now, as I said, we'll see you next time when we talk about Elephant by the White Stripes. And until then, I don't have any closing words that fit this movie, which is a shame.
Neither do I. But we will see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.